Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today in this video lecture I shall be talking about the famous novel Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence, which was published in 1913. Sons and Lovers is indeed considered to be one of the best novels in world literature, and in this novel Lawrence deals with the problems of family relationships as well as he focuses on the intimate relationship between a man and a woman. As far as D.H. Lawrence is concerned, according to him, an individual can attain true happiness only if there is harmony in a relationship, only if there is a proper balance between spiritual as well as physical, aspect or physical forces in human life. So, according to Lawrence, if there is a good balance of physical and spiritual forces in human life, then only one can realize true happiness. Apart from this, another important aspect related to relationship that he focuses on in this novel is acceptance of individuality as well as paying respect to one's individuality. In fact, the main conflict of the story is related to this aspect. Mrs. Morel, who herself being a well-educated woman, a high-born lady, initially when she was young, she got attracted to Mr. Morel because he was not like her father, and it was because he was different from her father that made her fall in love for him. But later on we find that how she couldn't stand her previously beloved husband. So the problem that arises in their relationship is because of her inability to accept Mr. Morel's individuality as an independent individual, which finally leads him to give in to drinking, and gradually he isolates himself from his family and becomes completely cold and indifferent towards them. Since Mrs. Morel, as I said, is a well-educated woman, she always had good intentions and she always tried to change her husband, Mr. Morel, like trying to divert him towards serious reading, and also she tried to instill in him the values of Christianity. But as a result of that, what she was actually doing, she was damaging his his sensitive emotional nature, which caused much dissatisfaction in him with his life, and therefore he finally gave in to drinking. As far as Mrs. Morel is concerned, she is not at all aware of her own contribution. She is not at all aware of her own doings, which led Mr. Morel to give in to drinking. And this leads to much distance between them as a husband and wife. And as a result of this, what happens is Mrs. Morel, being completely dissatisfied in her marital life, being completely dissatisfied with her husband, she diverts all her attention towards her younger sons, because she feels that it is by diverting all her care, attention towards her son, it would make all her efforts fruitful. So basically what we find in the novel is that Mrs. Morel, in fact, she destroys the individuality of Mr. Morel, and it is her position as a mother in the novel which becomes the main conflict. As far as the novel is concerned, it is a modern novel, and although it is a modern novel, yet we come across traditional values as well. And as we proceed, we find that how these traditional values get replaced by the modernist values. The main issue, or the main problem, or let's say the main topic of the novel is the tough relationships that exist between four main characters: Mrs. Morel, Paul Morel, Miriam, and Clara. After the death of William, we find how Mrs. Morel gets emotionally attached and gets very, very possessive about Paul. And it is this emotional attachment, her possessiveness towards Paul Morel, that does not allow Paul Morel to realize the difference between the right and the wrong. In fact, it inhibits his development as an individual. He is depicted by Lawrence as a modern character, but as far as his intentions are concerned with regard to women, we find that he is completely confused. He doesn't even realize what his true intentions are towards with regard to any woman who comes in his life. In fact, it is this huge influence, that is this huge impact of his mother upon him, that does not allow him to develop a successful relationship with any woman, whether it is Miriam or Clara. Miriam is basically a woman. Is basically a woman who is very religious, and her love towards Paul is selfless and true, genuine at the same time. On the other hand, we come across another character, Clara. She is also depicted as a modern woman who would like to live her life on her own terms and conditions. But then, when she meets Paul for the first time, she appears to be a traditional woman, because she was still a married woman. And marriage is nothing but a traditional symbol. It is a social institution. As far as Paul is concerned, despite Miriam's true affection, true feelings towards him, still we find that Paul fails to, see himself with Miriam. And not only that, it is the influence of Mrs. Morel upon him that inhibits, as I said, the formation of Paul's independence. In fact, throughout the novel, we do not find him a character who is independent, who can take his own decisions. In fact, we find that as far as his relationship with Miriam is concerned, he is satisfied to have her in his life just as a temporary friend. And the desire that a man nurtures to have a young girl as his beloved is completely absent in him. It feels or it seems as if he compares all these women who come in his life to his mother, and thereby he doesn't find them living up to his expectations. Not only that, Paul he makes attempt to make himself love Miriam, to have a successful, lovable relationship with her, yet it is the disapproval on the part of Mrs. Morel, as well as his own doubts with regard to his relationship, that finally make him withdraw himself from Miriam. And in the meantime, what happens? As I said, Clara, he gets closer to Clara Reeve, and Clara, who is depicted, to have traditional values when she's introduced to the reader for the first time. But gradually, as we proceed, we find that the novel also shifts from its traditional approach, or let's say from its traditional style to a modernistic style, because as far as Clara is concerned, we find that she gets involved in a physical relationship, in a very intimate physical relationship with Paul. And because she's a kind of woman who wants a change in her life, and we find that how she uses Paul Morel for her own physical needs. And it is this illegal, or let's say this illicit physical relationship between them that excites both Paul and Clara at the same time. Apart from this, we find the theme of love as well in the novel. Now, love is something which always unites the members of a family. Love is the force that establishes that deep bond, that strong bond between individuals. But as far as the Morel family is concerned, we find that this force is entirely absent. That pulling force between each other, that love, is not there. As far as Mrs. Morel is concerned, she has already withdrawn herself completely from Mr. Morel. And if we look at her son Paul, we find that he is also so much influenced by his mother that he also begins to follow his mother's footsteps, and he also begins to emulate his mother's feelings in disregarding his father, and even he doesn't seem to have deep feelings towards his father. So what happens is, as far as Mr. Morel is concerned, gradually he becomes cold and indifferent towards the family members. In fact, by the end of the novel, when we find that Mrs. Morel breathes her last, still at that moment, as a husband, he should have, been affected mentally, but we find that even in that condition, when he loses his wife, Mrs. Morel, still he appears to be very, very cold and indifferent towards the death of his wife. So here also we find that the traditional figure of a father who is respected in a family, who is obeyed in a family, is shattered by Lawrence, because Mr. Morel emerges as a character who is stubborn, who is much given to drinking, who is completely isolated from his, who is in fact a completely an isolated character in his own family. So, and as far as the family members are concerned, since they do not seem to have any deep feelings towards him, so that also leads to that is also responsible for his indifference towards his family members. So this traditional picture of the father figure is also shattered by Lawrence, and he emerges as someone who refuses to undergo any transformation for the good of the family. So when Mrs. Morel dies, he is neither surprised nor sad. Rather, he appears to have that same indifferent, cold demeanor. So it seems as if nothing bothered him anymore. Even Paul Morel seems to have the same kind of ending in his life. After the death of Mrs. Morel, it seems as if he lost everything in his life. He separated himself, he alienated himself from everybody. He fails to develop any successful relationship with any woman in his life, and Miriam, who still continued to love him despite his personal, problems, conflicts, and confusions. Still, he fails to marry her. He fails to develop that bond with her, and even with Clara, who simply used him for her own physical needs. So Paul emerges as a character who belonged to none, and so being alienated, being completely isolated from everyone, we find that he proceeds to the city. So as far as the novel is concerned and the traditional values are concerned, we find how D.H. Lawrence completely subverts the role of a traditional mother. He completely shatters the traditional picture of the father figure. And not only that, we find that all the traditional values related to a family are also crumbled in the novel. They also get crumbled in the novel. So here we find the talent of the novelist, where he is able, to present before his readers a different picture of reality, which is quite complex and complicated at the same time. So he not only that, he also destroyed the traditional values of love as well, because Oedipal complex is also at work in the novel. The kind of possessiveness, the kind of jealousy that we find Mrs. Morel undergoing in the novel makes her appear almost as a lover. The kind of envy that she feels towards William's girlfriends makes him behave quite similarly, quite similar to a lover. So this close relationship that Paul shares with his mother, and as well as the absence of a proper, male figure, father figure in Paul's life, also lead to his undeveloped sense, as I said, because it doesn't make him, it doesn't help him actually realize the difference between the right and the wrong. So what basically we find in the novel Sons and Lovers is that it portrays harsh reality with regard to family relationships, with regard to relationship between a man and a woman, and at the same time the message that Lawrence tries to convey to readers is that it is absolutely impossible for an individual, to sail in two boats at the same time. One needs to be confident, and one needs to be, determined, and let's say one needs to be firm enough to realize what he or she wants in his or her life, or what he desires the most, and then the individual should pursue that. It is completely unwise to try to sail in two boats, because we cannot have two things at a time. We have to choose the one which matters to us the most, and then pursue that. So what, as readers, we come across in the novel is we come across a different type of relationship between a mother and son and her sons. We come across different attitudes to life, whether it is a male figure or a female figure. Then we also come to know that we also understand one thing, that this kind of story or this kind of narrative is very, very important for readers to realize the harsh reality or the harsh aspects, related to a relationship. And not only that, in this novel we find Lawrence's in-depth knowledge with regard to human relationships, because this novel basically focuses on human relationships, its complications and its complexities at the same time. So I hope you find this lecture helpful in understanding the critical aspects of this novel, Sons and Lovers. So if you really find it helpful in understanding the text, do like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Until then, bye bye.